Second prize.
Yeah, do that.
I'm told I've got to keep to time, which is very difficult for me. I don't know why they asked me to chair it. Oh, there you go, stopwatch. Right, we've got to finish in about 55 minutes to an hour. I'm not going to say a great deal, although a lot of this book that Garratt has written deals with what happened to me personally, but of course I'm not the only victim of the witch hunt. This has been a manufactured crisis that was used to smash the Corbyn project, and regrettably the leadership fell into that and sort of treated the bad faith actors as if they were good faith complainants, and of course we know that they weren't. And the more that Jeremy and the leadership and the party and Jenny Formby succumbed to the accusations, the stronger it made the bad faith actors and the more ridiculous the accusations became. And so we're now left to the situation, and I made this point actually about 2 or 3 years ago, that in reality it's not Ken Livingstone or Jackie Walker or Mark Wadsworth or any of the other Tony Greenstein, Cyril Chills. I mean, there's huge numbers of people that have been targeted, and they're some of the most high profile ones. In the end, it was Jeremy Corbyn that they were actually after. And even in the end, it really wasn't really Jeremy Corbyn, it was the ideology, the programme that Jeremy was spearheading, his socialist programme at home and his anti-imperialist position in relation to foreign policy, and particularly in relation to his support for the Palestinian struggle. And that was unconscionable. And so you've got this coalition, I suppose, of forces, the kind of neoliberals and the military-industrial complex and the Israel lobby all coming together to do whatever they could to destroy that opportunity that, in my opinion, was squandered. But Lee is a good comrade of mine. He is somebody from Derby North who was a strong supporter of Jeremy and supported me. One of the few, I've got to say, on the general committee of the constituency, whilst lots of CLPs up and down the country were passing motions in support of me, and my own constituency refused to do so, on the pretext that Jenny Formby had sent a letter out saying that it wasn't competent business, and therefore, they shouldn't be debating it. And a number of right-wingers, I think, use that as an excuse to not actually have a discussion about whether they should pass a motion of solidarity in my support. And I know that Lee was at that meeting. I wasn't there because obviously I was suspended, and Lee might tell us a little bit about this, but I understand that he stormed out and gave them a few choice words on his way. So thanks, Lee, for doing that. And but Lee, yes, good man, yeah. Well, just tell us, Lee, then about the genesis of the book and what's in it, if people haven't read it, what drove you to write it, and where do we go from here?
Okay.
Give them a round of applause.
Yeah. So, is this working okay?
Yeah.
Oh.
This one is.
So, firstly, thanks to Resist for having me. I think, as many of you might sympathise in this room, the main theme of this book, in some companies, hopefully the companies we don't mix in too often, might feel you're fighting a little bit of a lonely battle at times. So it's nice to be in a room where, and the Facebook or the YouTube audience or whatever, where I'm assuming most people will kind of be in agreement. So that's it's nice. So you'll forgive me first of all if my presentation isn't perhaps as smooth as some. I think there's going to be a little bit of a dumbing down from the last one. I found the last one fascinating, but if the last one was postgraduate, we're going back down to O-level here. Yeah, I found it fascinating, but I think I was a little bit more confused at the end than the start. But it was interesting. Right? I learnt something. So yeah, speaking at a political rally is something of a first for me, as is hosting a book launch. And Resist have been very generous as well, and kind of left this up to me. So I'm thinking about today. I felt in something of a pickle. I thought if I just dealt solely with the topics of the book, seeing the incredible lineup Resist have got, people like Jackie Walker and Tony Greenstein and Chris himself and Asa Winstanley, I thought I might fall guilty of just retreading a bit of familiar ground for some people here. And then I thought if I just dealt solely with myself or the book itself, I thought it might become a little bit niche, a little bit boring for political events such as this. So, if you indulge me, I'll I thought I'd try and do a little bit of both and hopefully illuminate some topics of interest around the book. I've written this, so if it's a little bit stilted, if it gets a bit boring, feel free to boo or throw things and then Chris can move on. No, that's a bit soon. that was sooner than I was hoping for. Right. Yeah, I'm hoping that was ironic. So I thought at first maybe a little context might be useful, and this is something of a disclaimer. I've always been a keen follower of politics, but I would confidently expect that 90% of people here or watching would probably have been more politically involved in their lives. I've always been on the left. My family were all Daily Mirror readers and Labour voters, so as a teenager I gravitated to knocking on my estate. That was in the days, of course, when working class estates like mine were festooned with Labour Party posters and are full of colour. That was, you know, before the link had been broken, before the big betrayal that's gone on for the last few decades. And I think, even though I'm a little hazy, I think I was a member for a short while. But then, yeah, I was a member. It was 1987. I was in the 5th year at school, and I read the Communist Manifesto, and it was given to me by this kind of charismatic goth called Carl, with a K. You can imagine what the nickname we gave to him was. And it was like, with no hyperbole, it was like a bit of a lightning bolt for me. I mean, it's, you know, the Communist Manifesto stands in itself, but I don't often think it's considered as a literary work. I mean, it's fantastic. The first sentence, the spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. You know, the last bit, the proletarians have nothing to lose but the chains, and my politics have never been the same since. So yeah, I joined the Young Communist League in Manchester, and for those familiar with Manchester political scene, I was often on this, I can't remember the name of it, there's a bookshop on Shude Hill, and my weekends were spent trying to sell the militant, not the British militant, like an American militant. I've kind of tried to Google it, all gets a bit labyrinthine, the left politics, but yeah, this came to an end. I think I'd probably read a little bit too much Jack Kerouac and so on. So a lot of my 20s were spent travelling, ironically, for the subject of this book. The reason I left Manchester Young Communist was I travelled to, the first bit of travelling I did as a young man was to go to Israel, or the stolen West Bank, to work on a kibbutz. And so ever since then, really well until the recent years, I was just on the fringes of politics. I went to demos and so on. I was at the University of Greenwich, actually, and Stephen Lawrence's mum was in my class, and it was the bus stop I got off at to play football for the university team was where Stephen Lawrence was tragically killed, so I had that involved, and I went to the BNP demo in Welling and so on, but my direct involvement, it lapsed. Yeah, and that's, in brief, how it stayed until I moved in the wake of like a messy domestic situation to Derby North in 2014. Now, politics wasn't in the forefront of my mind during the first few months as I looked for work and navigated the benefit system, which isn't easy. But it didn't take me too long to realise that Chris Williamson was my MP, and it didn't take me too much longer to realise that I'd looked out. I could have ended up a few miles to the east, and in a Tory majority of thousands. It's like, what's the point? I could have ended up a mile to the south. It would have been Margaret Beckett again. Like, what's the point for someone like me? It's of no interest. But quite by chance on my part, I ended up in what I considered an exciting, not from Chris's blood pressure point of view, I suppose, but an exciting marginal with a left MP. Now, there was a few twists and turns, of course. Chris, unfortunately, narrowly lost the seat of 2015, but of course this coincided with Corbyn's rise to power, the left's rise to power, and I was a stereotypical Corbynista. Maybe like some people watching or some people in the room, I felt, this is what I've been looking for in my life, and I joined the party. So yeah, this started again my involvement with the Labour Party, and I slowly got more involved. I wasn't friendly with Chris, and I didn't know him, but I was impressed how in the wake of the defeat, he stayed in the constituency. Pretty rare that, right? I can't think of many examples of that. And he kept an office in the city. And he stayed visible, and he kept putting forward, increasingly confidently, it seemed to me, a kind of left version of, a socialist version of politics, which I'd always been looking for. And when the first Corbyn manifesto dropped, I remember feeling I was tearful. This is like incredible for me. And then, I got more and more involved, and it built to the 2017 election, you know, I met Chris a few times. He wouldn't have remembered. I was just one of the crowd, and you know, went from tens of us meeting at the Derby Labour offices to hundreds, you know, and it was a genuine radical fervour of the type before I'd only ever seen before on, you know, TV, you know, news clips about Venezuela or Corbyn. I thought this, after decades of betrayal, this is the potential, the latent potential of a genuine grassroots socialist movement. And Chris won a convincing result, right? And I thought, well, this is it. This is, away we go. Now, we all know what happened next. Obviously, however, in Derby North, with Chris as the MP, it was probably, well, the betrayal, whatever you wanted to call it, was much more front and centre. And it just seemed to me, straight from the start, just all incredibly organised, the attacks on Chris, and staged, and just transparent. It's like, how can anyone of reasonable mind, an adult, fall for this nonsense? Obviously, people did. And throughout this process, I kept waiting for a fight back. I thought there would be one. I thought there'd be an organised act of solidarity from the left, maybe national, maybe local, towards Chris. I was a bit naive on the local political front at that time. And that never came, other than, you know, the fantastic gestures of solidarity, which I'm sure must have kept Chris going at times from individual members and CLPs, but we didn't have the hands of the levers of power, right? And unfortunately, it didn't really mean anything. So my first actual dealings, when people might be curious about the book and my connections with Chris and so on, but my first actual dealings with Chris were only minor ones, you know, and unsurprisingly for an MP who stayed in the constituency, it was actually just meeting him in the centre of town. I'm a bit of an eccentric. If I see someone in the town handing out leaflets and stuff, I'll normally stop to chat to them, right? Most people shoot past, but I would always stop to chat. So Chris would be at the Ram, for those of you who know Derby, quite a lot of the time with a Labour Party activist. So I remember chatting to him about Brexit, actually, and I remember writing to him, you know, and as about a local issue about the local library closing, which is tragic, actually, but that's another thing. And he wrote back quite promptly. So again, I was impressed, right? I thought, this is great. But yeah, I think it was obviously the events of 2019 that really set me on the path to this book. It was just with, and I'm sure many of others felt it here, this kind of weird feeling of kind of disbelief, really, of just watching the events spiral out of control. I expressed my thoughts to the local Labour people. I'm friendly with them now, a lot of them, and there have been murmurs of concern. What was really odd, and it's still odd, is that whenever I talked to them, I brought it up directly. Now, these were people, Chris had been on the Labour Party political scene in Derby North for like decades. You know, I'd only joined recently, and they all knew him.
Can you stop using that phone, please, and have a bit of respect?
Well, stop it. Dan, go out and do it. Go out.
Nice. So where was I? So whenever I talked to them directly, like, none of them would countenance the fact that Chris was an anti-Semite. I mean, none of them, they'd always say, oh yeah, well, we all know he's not an anti-Semite, but then they'd always mutter something like, oh, politics is a nasty business, and maybe Chris has been a bit naive, and, you know, it's like, I don't understand what you're saying here. He's getting done as an anti-Semite, he's getting done as a racist, you know, it's, this is just nonsense. So, anyway, when Chris was suspended, I tried to move one of those motions that circulated in support. And I tried to organise, you know, there was support in Derby North, but we were a minority. But it was probably, history would have been different as far as I'm concerned with this book, I think. If that night it was revealed to me just the patheticness of the Labour Party locally. The right, you know, the bureaucratic types. I remember bringing the motion, and they were uncomfortable, they were whispering, and it was ruled out of order, and I was told it should have come through, we can't take this, we're very sorry, we can't take this motion, it should have come through the electoral ward first. Now, I'd already brought it to the electoral ward, and they had told me it should come through the CLP first. And those people were sat there, right? And these people knew each other. And it was like, you know, and I'm sure this bureaucratic stitch-up happened around the country. You know, it's democracy only in name, right? And yeah, it was just sitting there, seeing people sit idly by, happy to watch their own MP, not just their own MP, someone they all knew, beaten up as a racist, beaten up as an anti-Semite, which they all knew to be false. And it was, you know, it just came to stark realisation that minute when I was sat there that they were either cowards, right, and they were scared of putting their heads up, and there was a lot of that, or it just fitted in with the political agenda. and lots of them were, I didn't realise, were members of the Labour Party, Labour First, and both are equally contemptible, right? So I lost my temper at this meeting, stormed out. I think that was the first conversation we had knowingly between ourselves, and I can't remember, it was a mutual friend, and I think we'd had an agreement to ring each other after the event, just to see how it had gone. Chris rang us and asked us how it had gone. So it's not gone very well. But we had I'm on the way to the pub, Chris. It's not gone very well. I failed miserably. But that was the first proper chat we had. Now, from that point on, I followed Chris's story very closely. It was mostly at a distance, you know. I wasn't good friends with Chris, but I expressed support to Chris and mutual friends and solidarity with him. I signed up to fight his re-election battle. That sadly wasn't to be within the Labour Party, and I suppose I regret now. I was torn when Chris stood as an independent. I was really torn, and I suppose I didn't fight. I didn't help Chris out in his efforts there. I suppose I was thinking that I could still fight for Chris on the inside of the Labour Party. The Labour Party was still salvageable as a fight to be fought. Those hopes have turned out to be nothing, but hindsight's a wonderful thing, I suppose. But after the dust settled a little, it's never really settled, has it? But it settled a little. The whole thing had just stuck in my gullet, right? The anger and frustration just rose, if anything. And because I just thought, we've just witnessed, you know, me and other Labour Party members, we've just witnessed the real-time character assassination of our own MP through a pack of lies, right? And this should be the absolutely massive story that we as local Labour members we need to have a discussion about it, right? This is, you could live somewhere for 100 years and not have a story like this. And it was just maddening, incredible to me, and it still is, that they didn't want to. They wanted to just move on, pretend it had never happened. I mean, like, there's elephants in the room, and there's this, right? So, the genesis of this book was born, out of this frustration, I suppose. And perversely as well, I suppose, you know, I should mention, if it had not been for the COVID pandemic, you know, it's all a bit perverse in a way, but I had extra time and so on. And I'd also had a little bit of success with writing a couple of little fiction things. So it was probably a combination of all these things that led me to approach Chris. Now, it was an email last July, and I really felt quite awkward about it, actually. I thought, one, I'm almost a stranger to Chris, and to ask him to kind of be prepared to kind of divulge what I thought would be personal, hurtful stuff is a bit cheeky. And second was, I thought, am I at risk of making myself look ridiculous? Right? I've never written a political book, and I don't want to make Chris look ridiculous by writing a rubbish book. So it was pretty awkward. But yeah, Chris responded, which is testament to him. You know, he said, yeah, no one's approached me. That's probably, for such a massive story, obviously, is testament to the taboo nature of the subject, right? I mean, journalists would normally jump all over this, I'm sure. So it was a year ago, last July, I went to Chris's house. Didn't really know what I was doing. I thought I'd do like a little bit of an interview to kind of get some stuff I didn't really know the details on. And I don't know shorthand, and I didn't know if to turn up with like a notepad and a pen or a laptop. And then I thought, you know, is this a formal interview? Because Chris turned up and he gave me some homemade bread and stuff, and then I tried to ask him questions. And I was trying to make notes when it was all a bit confused. It was all really messy, right? And then so after the interview finished, and I went home on the bus with my laptop, and just looked at it, I thought, this is hopeless. I'm going to need to ask him all the questions again, but Chris helped me out on the email and so on. So yeah, so it was, then there was 5 months of hard work after that, and if I'm honest, there was times where I was dwarfed by the magnitude of the subject. It's a massive topic, right? And I started to go into it, and you know, you started to go into Jackie Walker's story or Mike Silvy's story. Have I pronounced his name right? I'm not sure. Or, you know, it just goes on and on. It's like, what do I... And then we sat at my laptop trying to write stuff, and it'd be 2 hours had been gone by, and I'd gone down different internet links, and I'm more confused now. You know, what's the chronology? What's the links? But kept at it. I mean, just as an aside, actually, I do think it's incredible. We take it for granted that me, as a kind of layman, I'm a teacher, but, you know, not academic, that, you know, in years past, the only people who would have been able to write a book like this, I'm assuming, would have been like, you know, scholars who could sit at the British Library all day, right, and follow all these. So we do take these things for granted that I could do it in a lockdown with Google. It's incredible, really. Anyway, after about 5 months, I think I've been emailing Chris, because I kept thinking, you know, I've gone to Chris with this idea, and I kept saying things like, emailing things like, yeah, Chris, it's coming along. And I was kind of thinking, is he thinking I'm just like a lunatic, you know? And I eventually emailed him with the kind of manuscript, which is the basis of this book. Obviously, it was edited from that point, and I'm not sure what I was expecting, but I think he said, bloody good job, Conway. That was his first response. So, and that set off the process of the road to publication. Can we just wait a few? Yeah. So yeah, it hasn't been easy from that point actually, and maybe as a point of interest, just to I think most people here, you know, we're all aware just how this subject is such a people are scared off. So I had initial interest from Verso and Bloomsbury especially. And I was behind the, I had a kind of an author profile with like a flow chart, what was going to happen. And it was all going well, right? There was loads of interest, I don't know, probably important people in Bloomsbury were emailing me, yeah, this is good, Lee, we'll do this with the book. And then someone popped up who'd read the book, because you get people inputting with different thoughts, and said, we don't think we should publish this until Bloomsbury, it was John Hunt, which is part of Bloomsbury, until we publish a book which gives credence to these allegations, we shouldn't publish this. And then someone else piped up and said, yeah, no, I agree, if we do this, it's going to damage us as a publisher. And I just thought, I'm a nobody. I've tried to write a political book. There's been no criticism of the literary work of this, and it's been blacklisted through political means. I mean, that's censorship by default, right? So I ended up having to go to, I'm grateful to him, you know, a small startup publisher. Once it was, and hopefully, you know, I think we've managed to do a good job in the end. We both worked on it together. And then even after publication, in the last couple of months, you know, I've emailed the Alliance of So-Called Radical Booksellers. No response. No response. I emailed 5 Leaves. Now, 5 Leaves, for those of you who know, that's a radical political bookshop in Nottingham. You know, I'm a local writer, radical, I like to think myself, I don't know, it's a bit grand maybe, but I've written a book about a local MP. The front page news, right? Oh no, we're not going to stock this book. Why don't you want to stock it? Oh, we can't stock all the books we're approached with. So, you know, so it's only thanks to social media and the left that it's managed to have any traction at all. So if any of you here have bought the book and helped promote it in any way, thank you very much, because otherwise it's just, you know, you're just left on your own, aren't you? Now, the book itself. So in my initial concept of the book, I think I wanted to appeal to readers of fair mind everywhere. That's what was my initial concept. Now, obviously, I'm aware of the massive market for this on the left, but it just always seemed to me that even for those people not on the political left, that I always thought that these people, when given a fair version of events, other than the one they've been spoon-fed by the media or whatever, that the basic injustice of what's happened should have been obvious. Now, whether I've managed to achieve that or not, I'm not sure. Unfortunately, society is very fragmented, right? But that's what I was trying to aim for. My initial concern was to try to define the terms of the debate. I thought lacking much of the commentary was zero discussion on what words like anti-Semitism and Zionism actually meant. You'd have whole articles in The Guardian and so on talking about someone being anti-Semitic, and it was never. So I tried to be clear from the outside what I meant by the use, and basically what I meant was just in the dictionary, right? It was just quickly leave to it. You know, it's just, you know, so much of this is overcomplicated, and it's done on purpose. I'll find it. Yeah, anti-Semitism, hostility to or prejudice against Jews. That's all you need to know, isn't it? Zionism, a movement for the development of a Jewish nation in Israel. I mean, these people who try to, oh, well, you don't understand the context, you know, you need to go on a re-education program. No, I don't. I just need to be able to be a normal, nice person, right, who can read a dictionary. It's not that complicated. I also wanted to talk about the context. This was challenging, actually. It was probably the bit where Tony gave me some feedback on that, and Chris as well, actually. What I was trying to do on that, I thought I wanted to kind of give a bit of Jewish history context, but obviously it's such a massive subject. I thought, you know, a whole book's a bit in it. And I didn't want to, but also at the same time, I didn't want to do too concise a version that was dumbed down. Yeah, hopefully, again, I managed to achieve it. Chris's story, I felt I needed to strike a balance. I wanted to give the reader enough context about Chris so they could have a more fuller picture. But also my book wasn't going to be an autobiography. I thought if I had whole chapters on Chris's council career in 1996, fascinating as I'm sure that is, Chris, I thought it might lose other people. Now, obviously, the heart of the book itself was Chris's story. And now I think that, for any keen Labour Party watcher, like myself, or political watcher, largely told itself. And I think Chris's accounts of these meetings he had, I don't know if you've read the book, is fascinating, right? You see, actually, this is how really how decisions get taken, these kind of panicked meetings with Seamus Mill and so on. So, yeah, that told itself. I suppose I had a strong desire to kind of have a narrative arc to the book and keep it as interesting and relevant. So I tried to think, out of all this mass of stuff, what would be the issues that would crystallise it? I thought Luciana Berger's tale was one, because it's a very strange tale, right? And it had massive traction. And I thought everyone buying this book would probably be aware of that thing. And the narrative in it's a sympathetic narrative on the surface, isn't it? It's a young Jewish woman subject to this horrendous anti-Semitic abuse. We can see what she was. It was horrendous, right? And people have gone to prison, and she's had to get a bodyguard to the Labour Party conference. You're crying tears reading this, aren't you? Until actually you have the time to look into it for like 2 minutes, and you go, this is just all wrong, right? There's just obvious facts which are never mentioned. One fact was that no one from Labour was ever found guilty of any anti-Semitic abuse towards her. Not one. Right? All the people locked up were nutters, right-wing nutters. And the fact that the opposition to her locally was politically oriented. It wasn't anti-Semitic. And all this stuff, it just takes a minute looking on Google or reading the Liverpool Echo or whatever. It's never... So I thought that would be a good chapter to try to crystallise a few issues. The Panorama programme, another one. Again, it's a fascinating story, right? Panorama, BBC. And then you look at it and it's, you've got Al Jazeera involved, you've got spies involved, you've got people threatening to Krav Maga on Jackie. These people being held up as credible witnesses. Again, it just didn't. Again, you look into it for more than 5 minutes, you think this is deeply, deeply flawed, to be very generous. And then I thought I'd look at the media reporting. Now, I think one of the things for many of us, which is especially hurtful, was just the one-sided reporting of it. I just found it incredibly frustrating. Just the other side of the story was just never told. And bizarrely, I suppose, maybe, I was naive, but one of the main attack dogs for this became The Guardian, right? And it was people like Owen Jones and Billy Bragg. Now, Owen Jones, I'm pretty sure I know the opinion of a lot of people in here about Owen Jones. I'm probably a bit more generous towards him, right? Because I think he's done some fantastic stuff. Some of his books are fantastic. Chav's fantastic books. Some of his journalism's fantastic. But on this issue, you'd read it, and it'd be, a massive article in The Guardian, and you'd read it, and you kind of think, actually, what have I just written here? And so I tried to boil it down in my book, what Owen Jones's article was. And, he's a very intelligent fella, I don't want to do it, don't want to pretend he's not. And I'll read out this section. Instead, Jones, not surprisingly, as someone whose whole life revolves around the media, is seemingly obsessed by the optics of the issue, the truth relatively insignificant by comparison. For Jones, like so much of the commentariat, how the problem is perceived is king, regardless of the ensuing accuracy. Jones' argument would appear to boil down to this. 1. British Jews feel mistreated by the Labour Party. 2. Therefore, de facto, the Labour Party is anti-Semitic. 3. Consequently, the Labour Party must keep on continually apologising whenever a new allegation occurs, however tenuous. 4. Anyone who denies the validity of this argument is enabling anti-Semitism and is therefore an anti-Semite. I mean, there's circular arguments, and there's that, right? And they all peddled this, Navarra media. And people like Billy Bragg, it was basically, people feel that you've been anti-Semitic, so you've got to apologise. It's like, there's no end to this, right? Now, the decision to include the documents as Chris, again, for people who read it, it's quite an unusual book in a way. There's like a mass of appendices. But, I think, again, it depends on if people have read it, but I think they're a vital historical record of what's gone on. And again, it's down to the credit to Chris for giving these, providing me, a relative stranger, entrusting me these documents, right? And the fascinating reading, just a car crash of stupidity, these questions they're asking him, it's just idiotic, right? And you could see Chris's frustration when he's trying to give an answer. It's just, well... And then and the callousness of it as well, and if you're feeling a bit down about this, contact the Samaritans. This is someone who'd worked in the Labour Party movement all his life, right? All his life. Oh yeah, contact the Samaritans. Now there were lots of other things I didn't get around to including. I had an ambition at the start of the book to try to look at the psychology of witch hunts. I found that really interesting. Look at Salem and Pendle and so on. But, started looking at that, I thought, it's getting a bit too, it'll just expand, it'll set the balance of the book. The other one I wanted to do, and I'm kind of a little bit disappointed to do this, or I didn't manage to do this, was I wanted to draw direct parallels to the last great witch hunt, was the purge of Militant in the 1980s. But again, it's kind of interesting, if you go even back to the 1980s, there's not as much stuff around, because obviously the internet was around, so it's harder for me to find stuff. So again, I dropped that. Truth, because I've always been pretentious. So truth was another big issue I wanted to try to look at. So I tried to look at, what is truth? Because there's a lot of things, you'd have the Labour Party and the Guardian, the BBC reporting one thing as a true story, and you think, that's not true. So I thought I'd try to look into that, but it's a question philosophers have been debating for thousands of years, right? So that started to get too big as well. So I think if you read the book, you'll see the quotes I've attached to some of the chapters which give you the idea of what I was trying to do. So I've talked a lot, but I notice I haven't really dealt with the subject of the book itself. I think maybe Norman Finkelstein sums it up better than me. In the conclusion, I quote him at length, he says, Corbyn did not present a threat only to Israel and Israel's supporters. He posed a threat to the whole British elite. Across the board, from the Guardian to the Daily Mail, they all joined in the new anti-Semitism campaign. Now that's unprecedented. The entire British elite during this whole completely contrived, fabricated, absurd and obscene assault on this alleged Labour anti-Semitism, of which there is exactly zero evidence. Zero. So that sums up. I'll still talk a little bit about it. In brief, I think what occurred was an injustice of historical magnitude. We shouldn't do it down. It's one for the ages, I think. And I think the picture is complex, and we'll never really get to the truth behind it, right? How will we ever know for sure what Tom Watson and his clique on WhatsApp really thought? I mean, we can all have our assumptions, right? And mine probably shares some of yours, but we'll never really know. But what I think happened was, it was an interesting freak of political history, but I think the left needs to, because we've still not taken our lessons, well, people here have, but the left didn't take the lessons from it at the time. One is that I believe that behind all this nonsense, there is an organised Zionist group in Israel, with the supporters here in the UK, who have just knowingly tried to muddy the waters with criticism of Israel. Now that's seen in some quarters. What I would have said though would be, oh, you're being anti-Semitic, it's a worldwide conspiracy. No, it's not. It just makes total sense. If the opposite, if it didn't happen, you'd be surprised, right? If from their point of view, if you're living in an embattled part of the Middle East where you were under threat, why wouldn't you do that? So that's what they've set off to do, and they've done it successfully, right? As we all know, if you criticise Israel, you've always got to hedge it now in, I'm not anti-Semitic. They've won, in a way, in mainstream debate. We all tread down these eggshells now. So they did it, and they did it successfully, and it's, Two, those Zionist interests, I think, coincided with the Labour Party, much of which, at that time, were looking for a way to attack, undermine, and defeat the political enemies on the left. And when they saw the Zionists doing it and the traction it got, they jumped on board. Again, from their political point of view, these people like Peter Mandelson and stuff, yeah, why not, right? It works. Three, I think, again, the other part of this, why it became such a massive thing, was it got massive traction in the media. Now, I think that's, one, down to the mainstream media's ever willingness to criticise the left, socialism, the capitalists, right? And also, I think there was this kind of unwillingness to criticise the perceived Jewish community's opinion on stuff. And some of it's understandable, some of it comes from a kind of politeness, If a Jewish person is feeling that, say, is alleges being anti-Semitic. So But the problem was, it was this awkward terrain that these people of bad faith were just able to play so many people off expertly, because they knew other people felt awkward about it. And the final, and for me, fascinating part of the argument was the complicity of the victims. Unprecedented, I would say. Time and again, all the Labour Party did, in the face of these outright lies, was just apologise. Now, I've never been involved in politics in any level other than just a normal member, but it just seems, you know, you've got all these incredible strategists I read about them, you know, these kind of brilliant brains like John McDonnell and so on, and Seamus Milne, but it just seems to be an obvious, terrible political strategy, right? Now, if someone here said, "You've just hit me, Lee," and I went, "Oh, I'm sorry for hitting you," right? I just kind of think everyone here is probably going to think, "Oh, well, he probably hit him," right? Because he's just apologised. And that was it, wasn't it? That was, you know, you can overcomplicate things. Maybe I'm a simple person, but that was the strategy, and it's just like, that's mental. So when, you know, when Chris came out at the Momentum rally, you know, meeting in Sheffield, and just kind of said that in a more better way than I just put it. Yeah. So when Chris told the meeting in Sheffield, the party that has done more to stand up to racism is now being demonised as a racist, bigoted party. I've got to say, I think our party's response has been partly responsible for that, because in my opinion, we've backed off too much. We've given too much ground. We've been too apologetic. Now, how can anyone of fair mind take much umbrage with that? I mean, you might disagree with it, right? But, you know, again, I'll read, you know, Louisiana Berger, "That's what I've left behind, it's toxic." Jonathan Friedland, "Labour's insistence that the party is an implacable foe of anti-Jewish racism is rendered laughable." You know, it's just like, have I fell down some rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland? It just doesn't bear up to the reality, and that happened time and again. You just kind of think, I'm missing something here, but obviously we weren't. It was just, people lie enough, most people fall for it, and that's a depressing conclusion. Now, it's an interesting question to me, how many of these people knowingly took part in the lie, or those who fell for it. I think, for the most part, at a base level, I think much of the Labour Party kind of fellow travellers or members, a lot of them were duped, right? A bit like weapons of mass destruction, or you know, pick your topic, right? Miners being the enemy within or whatever. If that's the narrative, that push all the time, people will go, and it wasn't just with this, it wasn't just on The Guardian and places like that. You know, you watch Have I Got News For You, and one of the comments would go, there's this lazy jibe about Williamson or someone, Williamson or Chris or Corbyn being an anti-Semite. It was just part of the domain, right? So you kind of think most people who don't have the time to follow it go, oh, yeah, okay, there must be a bit anti-Semite, there must be a problem. So, yeah, so I think there was that. But I do think there was a significant number of the PLP who knowingly lied. And I think, as a significant, you know, you'll never know how, was some of them, did they genuinely get upset? Did Margaret Hodge genuinely get upset? Yeah? I mean, I don't know. But they knew in their hearts, you know, I'm sure that Chris, I keep saying Williamson, sounds a bit formal, Chris and Corbyn weren't anti-Semitic or racist. I mean, that's obvious nonsense. But they were just happy to perpetrate this myth because they knew it furthered their political cause. And, you know, I try to be wary of hyperbole. Actually, maybe I don't. I think I'm quite prey to hyperbole. But the fact that these types, Watson and Hodges and so on, were willing to use the Holocaust and the emotions of a Jewish community in the name of their petty politics, I think it's truly disgusting. And, you know, I would say evil, in the true sense of the word. And now, I don't believe in hell. I'm an atheist, but if they did, you know, there should have been a special circle in it for them. Now, I'd also like to say the following to end on. I think it's a trite observation in many ways, but without solidarity, the left has nothing. Again, it's probably true that I'm not as politically involved as many in this room. And I've got many friends who aren't involved in politics, or if they are, the lifelong working class Tories, or even worse, attracted by kind of populist ideas of the right, UKIP or whatever. And I do try to keep the personal separate to politics. Maybe I'm being a bit coward on that. It's always a difficult area for me, that. But what I would say is that if I was walking down the street and I fell over and I banged my head, what I'd like is some help. Now, if this help came from someone who'd voted for UKIP or whatever, and a member of the socialist campaign group walked by because their grand political strategy they were supposedly working to necessitated that I was, or you've probably got the analogy where I'm going to now, the loss of Chris was political collateral that was worth that, then I say to them or anyone, you've gone wrong. You know, and your politics is now worth absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. We must always be the ones to offer a helping hand. We must always be the ones to offer solidarity. To be a socialist is ultimately to stand with us, to say, I will fight your fight when it's difficult. I see so many people taking a stand on easy issues, and when it matters, they go. So I think if you're sat here today or watching, I think you're the kind of person who stands with someone even when it's difficult and others are walking by. So I applaud you, comrades. And for socialism to ever succeed, that's always, I think, where we need to start from.
Thanks very much indeed. Well, that was bloody brilliant. I mean, we talk about standards of education deteriorating since we went to GCSE. If that was O-level standard, my God, it sounded a lot more like PhD level. That was bloody brilliant, mate. You got the audience enraptured, I think. It was a wonderful and fascinating account. Right, okay, well, I said that we've got about 55 minutes, so that means we've got about 15 minutes, therefore, left. If there's any comments or questions from the floor. Jackie. I'll be the roving mic as well, I'm not sure the one's working.
Can I just say, you know, having heard this, I know how true this is. In fact, I know how truer than true this is. You're living in a strange world. I'm just going to tell you one story that illustrates this. I had a very well-known TV producer come to me, and he said, this is just the story of our generation. I want to make it. Would you be willing to be involved? I said, yeah, but you'll never get to make it. And he said, no, I know the people to go to in Channel 4. I know exactly how to put it. I've got my evidence. It is absolutely irrefutable. I said, you'll never get it passed, right? A few weeks later, he came back to me and he said, I couldn't believe it. I went to the right people, I had my evidence, and they said, there is no way we can make this. And I wrote back because I wasn't surprised. And I said, well, maybe before we're dead. You know, 20 years' time, it'll come up, Jackie Walker, Chris Williamson, you know, Tony Greenstein, whatever, all resisted this awful witch hunt. He said, no, he said, not the way I read it, more like 50 years' time. That is how bad it is. This is absolutely sewn up. And can I tell you, this goes right to the top as well as the bottom. Right to the top as well to the bottom. I have spoken to people on what was Jeremy's leadership team, and they said to me, we knew it wasn't the truth. We knew. And if socialists can't stand up for the truth, then they shouldn't call themselves socialists, and they shouldn't be ending their speeches with solidarity. Thank you.
Absolutely. Right, yeah, John.
Thanks, Chris. Congratulations. It's a marvellous book. I read it on the train down from Scotland, on my little thing, you know, and it's very, very impressive. And it will be reviewed. For those of you who don't know, I write for a magazine, an online magazine called Lobster. And Lobster has been writing about this for 25 years. They go back to the time before John Smith died, when Tony and Cherie went to Israel, came back from Israel, were introduced by the number 2 at the Israeli embassy to Michael Levy. And from the moment that John Smith died, Michael Levy provided money for what became New Labour. And he provided it in a way that meant that the Labour movement no longer was necessary for New Labour financially. They didn't need members, they didn't need membership contributions, and they didn't need trade union contributions. And that's how it developed. And when Michael Levy stepped down when Tony Blair stepped down. Up popped his deputy, Jonathan Mendelsohn, and he did exactly the same for Gordon Brown. So it goes back to that point. It goes back even further, because in the 80s I was briefly the party's chief press officer, headhunted by Neil Kinnock and subsequently sacked by Peter Mandelson. And I could see the beginnings of that network then, and it coincided with the beginning of what we became to know as the War on Terror, which was started by Netanyahu back in the 1980s. And at that time, he was blaming it all on the Soviet Union for backing the Palestinians. And when that Cold War ended, and the Soviet Union couldn't be blamed for that, it then switched to the War on Terror. And the War on Terror is part of the same con that got Chris and got Jackie and got lots of other people. And partly of the problem is that most people in the party don't think strategically about what's going on in the world. And they also are possessed of a human decency which has been exploited by the people who wanted to promote the war on terror. And even in the North Islington constituency where I lived until 2 years ago, I got in trouble for even raising these matters because somebody's boyfriend was Jewish and therefore was thinking of resigning from the party. Now, what you've done, I think, is really struck right at the center of this by making it a personal thing about Chris and detailing the whole thing, but there's a wider strategic dimension to this which most people in the labor movement either don't know about or don't want to look at, because they don't want to be accused of any kind of prejudicial behavior. And that's a decent instinct. And you're right about this being about evil, because that has been ruthlessly exploited by the people who want to promote the war on terror. And we've now discovered, since the Afghanistan withdrawal, what a huge con that was, and how many people around the world, as well as our own citizens who served there, how they have been damaged by this whole thing. It's damaged our whole political culture. Jackie's right. It means that people nominally on the left within the labor movement have looked the other way, not just in failing to defend Chris, which was disgraceful in itself, but in the way they've wanted to paper over this whole issue. And until we grasp the dynamics of what's going on internationally with all of this, how it's tied into the intelligence services, how it's tied into the US foreign policy historically, we don't get anywhere near to dealing with the subtleties of this at all. I just recommend Lobster Online. I don't get paid for writing for them. Look at Lobster Online. They have been covering this stuff in great detail, as I say, for the whole of this century. And the material is there for you to see.
And it's certainly well worth reading. So just before I bring the rest of the audience in, I'm delighted that Amar Kazmi has been able to join us. I was hoping Amar would be able to be here from the start and hear what Lee had to say. But Amar worked in my team. People will probably be well familiar with Amar. I first met him when he made this incredible speech at a rally when he was just 18. One of Jeremy's first leadership rallies in Nottingham at the Albert Hall in Nottingham. I remember going home and saying to my partner, I've seen this amazing kid, he made this bloody incredible speech without notes, it was just astonishing. And then I got to know him and we became good comrades, and he worked in my team, and he's been working on the Left Legal Fighting Fund, and he's also got a particular expertise around the issue of the EHRC, and people will obviously be familiar with that appalling report that came out. Politically motivated, of course. They wanted to name me in it. We forced them back on that. They only were able to identify 2 individuals, and we're assisting them now in taking judicial review proceedings against the EHRC, and we've got permission for that. And that's obviously Ken Livingston and Pam Bromley, a councillor in the north of England. But I just wanted to quickly, and we've only got about 10 minutes left, actually, Amar, and there's a couple of people wanting to sort of say something from the floor as well. Just get that EHRC perspective from somebody who is an expert on it. So over to you, Amar.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that very glowing introduction. Too glowing because I'm afraid I didn't really prepare. So unlike that speech in the Albert Hall, it's not going to be as as charismatic, I'm afraid. And yes, I regret being late, and I apologise for that, and I regret that I didn't get to hear your contribution, Lee, and obviously everyone else's contributions for context. So I am kind of going without that context in mind. What I want to focus on, yes, is about the sort of EHRC, and obviously the anti-Semitism crisis, in inverted commas always, is a very sort of broad issue. I'm going to look at really the issue of lawfare, and of course the EHRC report was part of that lawfare strategy. So lawfare, well, in its most sort of simplest terms, lawfare is the use of litigious or legal means in order to achieve political ends. But I would actually, in terms of how lawfare has been applied, I would say, I would give it a broader definition, which is that it's the use of sort of any sort of legal, bureaucratic, or regulatory sort of mechanisms in order to essentially attack people for their political beliefs, whether that's through court cases, like libel cases. We've seen lots of these libel accusations going around and people having to sort of capitulate, pay damages. Whether it's the Labour Party's disciplinary processes, I would also count that as a form of lawfare against people. We've seen these strategies being used against the left, and that's not just unique to the UK. We've seen that in Brazil against Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff. We've seen it in Bolivia against Luis Arce, the new president of Bolivia, and of course Evo Morales and many of the people who are part of his cabinet following the coup. We've seen it with Pablo Iglesias, the former General Secretary, or Secretary General, sorry, of Podemos in Spain. So it's not a new strategy. And essentially the way it works really is about leveraging, from their perspective, leveraging an imbalance of power. Because they don't, for them, it's really a cost-free thing to do. Or, it's a very low-cost thing for them to do. Not that they don't have the resources to put the costs in when they need to do so. But what they tend to do is they use institutions, and when I say they, I say Zionist fanatics, Zionist activists. They tend to use institutions like the Equality and Human Rights Commission, like professional regulatory bodies, like the Labour Party, to outsource their dirty work. All they need to do is create such a climate of fear and to effectively level the accusation of anti-Semitism, and then leave it to the EHRC, leave it to professional regulatory bodies like the Bar Standards Board. We have barristers, for example, being put before the Bar Standards Board, or the General Medical Council, or for pharmacists, all this kind of stuff. And in the Labour Party, they just need to refer it to the Labour Party, and that's it really for them. They can just pack their bags up. I mean, with the EHRC, we had the self-styled campaign against anti-Semitism, making legal submissions, and that obviously had some payment to it. But generally speaking, they don't really have to do any of the dirty work. They refer it to these institutions to conduct these lawfare operations. But then, of course, if you're subject to that sort of lawfare operation, it's incredibly costly for you. So that's where the imbalance of power comes in. And of course, you'll probably be aware that Chris Williamson, so formal, Chris, the guy next to me, was subject in the draft report, was named in the draft report of the EHRC. And he was only able to get his name removed, and actually, in order to, to actually change other parts of the report by crowdfunding, getting together a legal team, a top expert legal team, making submissions to the EHRC, to the extent that they dropped Chris from the report. In fact, they dropped, Chris informs me, they dropped several pages from the report as a result of those that were unrelated to Chris, as a result of those broader legal submissions. In the end, they managed to, the two witches they managed to put forward were Pam Bromley and, of course, the former Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone. But it goes to show that, if you come together and you pursue a counter-lawfare strategy, these people can be beaten. And I think we do need to be focused on the left, and it shouldn't obviously be our sole focus, but we do need to be aware of this issue of lawfare, be cognizant of it, and also develop strategies in order to combat it. One of those many counterweights that we need to be putting together, and I think it has to be a broad broad strategy is an organization called the Left Legal Fighting Fund, which Chris founded from the cost that he won back from the Labour Party after winning his court case in 2019 when they unlawfully resuspended him from the party. And through the Left Legal Fighting Fund, we've been able to pursue, on a small level, of course, through grassroots donations, a lot of, pursuing a counter-lawfare strategy, whether that's Black Lives Matter protesters last year who were being criminalized by the police, arrested, accused of, rioting and all these other sorts of incredibly harsh, legal offences that could have landed them in prison for 10 years. We've been able to assist some Black Lives Matter protesters in order to, provide them with the support they need so that the police essentially back off and they drop those charges. We've been able to help another person in a case of, alleged electoral fraud, other people who have been subject to libel cases who otherwise would have, because the thing is with libel cases is, we know the prominent Zionist lawyer Mark Lewis, he tends to work for free for these people. He just does a no-win, no-fee sort of thing. So it's no cost for them to pursue a libel action. But then, of course, if you want to defend it, if you're in the position where you have to defend it, you have to bring up lots and lots of money to pay for your own lawyers. And if you lose, then the cost can be absolutely devastating and astronomical. So we've been able to step in at an early stage for a few people and been able to provide them with the legal support so that we essentially call their bluff. Sometimes they're not bluffing, but sometimes they are bluffing. They just send a letter. It's very easy for them to send a letter, shake them down, force them into, writing a groveling apology and paying damages. So we've been able to assist with that. So I think we really need to be focused on that, and we've seen some success in that respect in terms of Chris. Of course, Chris mentioned that the Left Legal Fighting Fund is pursuing with Ken Livingstone and Pam Bromley a judicial review of the EHRC report. That's going to be incredibly important because part of the EHRC's legal analysis was to say that these really benign statements, ranged over sometimes, several years, could constitute harassment against people. That legal analysis cannot stand, and it cannot stand not because it's legally binding, not because it sets a new legal precedent. It's not going to be binding in future legal cases, but it will have a corrosive impact, and we're already seeing it in certain sectors where people think, like universities or schools or other institutions, they look at the EHRC report and they see the consequences of not essentially harshly disciplining people who are just accused of anti-Semitism. And they will come to the impression that, well, perhaps we should just, it's less costly for us to just, throw that person under the bus. So that's why it's so damaging. We need to defeat it. And I think I'll wrap up there because we're coming towards the end. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed for that. I think that was a very useful slight detour on this whole episode. Somebody in the back, I can't see you, comrade, because the lights are too bright. Sorry, yes, I'm going to get you as well, mate. I couldn't see you either, but I know there's two. So it's Tony, isn't it, that? Yeah. And a comrade there. So if you just go you, and then we'll go to Tony.
Hi there, Chris. It's Damien from Dorset.
Oh, yeah, sorry,
Dorset.
mate. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, fine. So Chris knows all about my case. I feel like I'm going mad sometimes, but it is at some point in the future, might there be a case brought by people who have been hounded by the Labour Party, who have managed to prove that they're harangued by people who were identified in the leaked Labour report? People like Audrey White, I know it wasn't the Labour Party that smeared her, but that some people have had success in proving that they were the victim of a vicious campaign. As you know, my case is rather unique because the Labour Party accidentally leaked the name of the person who tried to smear me. It's the same person who claimed to have done it to thousands of other people. He claimed recently that he was working for Ian McNichol's secret group, and he was exposed in the leaked Labour report for making spurious complaints. If that isn't the basis for a case which is absolutely winnable, I don't know what is. Lots of people know about my case. Peter Oborne's coming here. He got his sidekick, Richard Sanders, to speak to me about my case. I have got smoking gun evidence. I can name the person. I can give you all the emails that link this, and it proves absolutely there was a conspiracy, and we know that. I knew it before the leaked Labour report came out. Can we not get all these people who can prove they were smeared, backed up by the EHRC that said 70% of cases had been badly dealt with, whatever the Ford report's going to say, and the leaked Labour report. Why is that not the basis for a winnable case that blows this whole thing open and proves once and for all this was a campaign engineered at HQ?
Yeah, I'll bring Amar back to respond to that, but let me go to Tony, and then I'll ask Lee to respond to some of the comments before as well.
Right, thank you. I'm sorry you couldn't see me.
Sorry, mate, Sister Lights are too bright.
Right, no, I didn't realise. I spent, in fact, most of last night before going to bed reviewing your book for the Weekly Worker on my own blog. So I do have quite a lot to say, but of course I can't possibly do it now. When I spoke at the rally yesterday, if people remember, I made the point that really your case, that of Chris Williamson, was the watershed moment when I knew that the Corbyn project had been defeated. The failure of Corbyn, the failure of McDonnell, the failure of the left as a whole to be able to stand up to the completely false and lying narrative that the press, from The Guardian to The Sun, had propagated, was catastrophic. And when we think of it, I mean, it illustrates what Marx said in the German ideology. The ruling ideas of society are the ideas of the ruling class. And if they say that 2 and 2 make 10, then 2 and 2 make 10. It's an Orwellian concept. But we heard you read out the speech of Chris Williamson at Sheffield, and anyone of reasonable and sound mind who reads that cannot possibly say that it's anti-Semitic. But we should get away from this idea that Jews are somehow precious. You can't criticize a Jew, for fuck's sake. You know why you should get away with it? Because Jews today are not the Jews of 80 years ago. They're not the Jews of the ghetto in Poland. They're not the Jews of the East End, 50% of whom voted Phil Pirata, the only elected communist MP in England. The Jews today are white. They're privileged. They have no oppression. They have an identity. It's an identity about the ruling class. It's an imperialist identity, the majority of them. Of course you can fucking criticize them. And if that's anti-Semitism, so be it. Yeah? This preciousness. As for Owen Jones, you're too kind by halfly, I'm afraid. He's an identity politician. He believes in identity politics. And he gravitates towards the identity of the least oppressed and counterposes it to the identity of the most oppressed. The guy is a reactionary rogue, and you shouldn't give him the time of day. Yeah. Now, I do have one or two criticisms of your book, which I won't detail. First of all, I'm bemused as to why you start off with a quote from Nietzsche.
We'll detail them.
Where you say, facts don't exist. It's just the interpretation of them that matters. I disagree. The Nakba is a fact. The Holocaust is a fact. You can interpret all you like. You can't get away from facts. That's postmodernist nonsense. So I disagree with you on that. The second thing was, which I think you should have left out the Jewish history. I don't think you went down the track of the Zionist fable of 2,000 years of Jewish suffering. That, again, is a nonsense. That is a rewriting the present back into the past. Jews in the past were agents. They were oppressors. They lent to the peasants and extorted from them at a profit in Poland for hundreds of years. Yes, I mean, Jews were not victims until very late. I mean, Israel Shahak, who's probably maybe the greatest ever Israeli, a survivor of Belsen and the Warsaw Ghetto, said, quite simply, there is no one interpretation of Jewish history as you go along. Jews have changed. That's the whole nature of it. There have been various Jewish identities. The second point I wanted to make was on the Atzman affair, if you remember. You are actually wrong on Atzman. Atzman is a convinced anti-Semite. And if you search my blog or other places, you will get it. The guy, yes, he's an ex-Israeli soldier. He was turned by what he saw in the Lebanese war. But he drew Zionist conclusions from that what Israel did was inherent in the Jewish makeup. That's why he is anti-Semitic. However, Chris was wrong to withdraw his name from the petition. Because I read the campaign against Axman from 2007. Our campaign was against Axman and what he said. We never argued or suggested that he shouldn't be allowed to play jazz. He's a world-class jazzman. And so I was happy to sign the petition saying he had that right to play. And in fact, I even attended his concert in Brighton to make the point even more clearly. So that was a minimal thing. But I will just say about the Corbyn coterie and what Jackie said was interesting. Because in my view, if they actually understood what was happening and did nothing, they're even more culpable. Yeah. And I think over Seamus Milne, he was a scion of the British ruling class. His dad, Alistair Milne, was the Director General of ITV. And I just raised the question, why he, who had a Middle East specialism and he knew about Palestine, didn't outline a strategy? Well, I leave it as an open question as to who he was actually employed by.
Thanks very much indeed, Tony. A really incisive contribution. I'm sorry I couldn't see it, Conrad, but I'm glad you were able to make those points. I just want to give Amar quickly a response to Damien's comment, and then give the closing words to Lee, because there's been a few points raised which are directly at Lee, and I think it's important for him to be able to respond to them.
Yes, I think the thing is about pursuing a legal strategy is I think we always have to be very, very strategic, because unfortunately we can't lose sight of the fact that this is a bourgeois legal system. Bourgeois judges, bourgeois courts. I say this as a law graduate, someone who wants to be a practicing lawyer. You know, the law is for me, it would be a job. It's not a site of, you know, Marxist struggle. I don't think it can be. So it has to be used strategically in order to benefit us when we can do that. And I think that you know, there's been lots of talk about if we could take one case. I think, you know, we'd have to assess what the legal arguments are for that. If we were to, for example, with respect to the leaked report, there are multiple issues there. There's issues primarily around data protection, other issues around libel potentially, and so it's kind of a complicated mess. It's like, and you have to decide which angle you're going to pursue it from. Just so you're aware, we did actually support, the Fighting Fund supported 8 Labour Party members alongside another group called Labour Activists for Justice to take the Labour Party to court recently in respect of these false allegations of anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, while I think the case was quite strong, the case was lost. It was a very rare loss for the Fighting Fund because, you know, at the end of the day, it turned on sort of the judicial philosophy of the judge, who sort of took the view that, you know, we're a court of law, we're not going to interfere in the affairs of political parties. So it's very, very difficult to pursue legal strategies. We have to be clear-eyed and sort of clear-minded about that, and only take legal cases when we have a very strong chance of success and we know exactly what end goal we're pursuing. So with respect to a big legal case, well, we've just had one. I'm not saying that potentially aren't other avenues, but we need to think very carefully about, you know, why we're taking that case, what we want to get at the end of it. Because at the end of the day, you're asking the court, a bourgeois court, to make certain declarations in your favour. They can't say, you know, they can't interfere to the extent that they would say the Labour Party has to do this, that, and the other. They could say, well, that's unlawful, or you know, the court declares that this is X, Y, and Z. But they can't really compel the party to do anything. So there are other sites of struggle we need to be engaging with in order to try to resolve those issues, I think.
It's a scandal. There's no doubt. There's no doubt that it's a scandal, comrade. And but I think you know, sometimes, you know, the law doesn't sort of deliver what we want. That's not to say we can't take that, but as Amar said, we've got to be clear-eyed and strategic about it and take the best possible legal advice. And we did take the best possible legal advice, and we were assured. In fact, Amar was suggesting, if I can perhaps reveal a secret, that we he was nervous about it, actually, because we'd forced certain concessions by the party, publishing the secret code by which they were judging people, for example. And when that was then published, Amar said, we need to take a rain check on this, and maybe we should pull out. But we had a meeting, and the lawyers were still fairly confident, and they said they thought that the result would be something of a curious egg, potentially.
Lots of these things you can't predict.
No, it's very difficult, very difficult. That's the problem. Anyway, look, we're actually over time, but I do want to give Lee the final word because this was a session to launch his book. So if you haven't bought it, please buy it. It's called Labour, the Anti-Semitism Crisis and the Destroying of an MP. Some people are saying, why did he call it destroying of an MP? He's supposed to be a bloody English teacher, is that right? But anyway, he talked about standards, O-level, and that, notwithstanding his wonderful performance earlier on. But anyway, so here it is with this idiosyncratic title. Please buy it if you've not already.
Sharon, it's a process, the destroying. I think it's...
Yeah, well, there we go, see. So there you go. So it's a point of debate. It's a point of debate, a bit of sort of a pedantic discussion there, and that's great. So let me leave the final word to Lee to respond to some of the points and any other concluding comments you want to make, Lee.
Not entirely sure. Thank you very much, first of all, for your kind comments. I'll check out Lobster. I wasn't aware of that. There's lots of things, isn't there, you're not always aware of. So, yeah, I'll check that out. Thank you. Nothing further to add, really. I think I've said my piece. Tony, I take your points on board. I mean, I'm kind of happy to stand by what I wrote regarding my kind of pressy of the Jewish thing. I mean, partly maybe some of your complaints there might be the fact I'm trying to give a kind of brief and concise report. Okay, but people are allowed to have different opinions, Tony, and you're very well learned. I'll be wary of taking you on. But I'm happy. I'm happy to. I'm happy to stand by this. I think with Atzmon, I think maybe there's a slight misreading, perhaps. I mean, I definitely didn't call him. I just gone back to the paragraph. I don't think he's an anti-Semite. So I think you're characterising of me saying I was wrong, and that's not my position. I think my position is, I think it's I was just again trying to give a brief account of how Chris's treatment of that and him was being called an anti-Semite was unfair. So that's what I was trying to do there. And just maybe because I'm always drawn to these kind of things, I suppose, I think just my opening quote from Nietzsche about there are no facts, only interpretations. I suppose it was, just to finish on, I was trying to be a knowing nod to the fact that I think in this age that we live in, I think truth is up. Truth is up for debate, right? And it's something we fight over all the time. And you've got the big state actors and big media players will put forward a narrative of the truth. And anyway, so that was my intention with that quote, was to kind of question this idea from the start and how this book would be dealing. Thank you very much. So yeah, but thanks for the kind comments. And Becky or anyone, what should we do with the book signing? Should we be doing that downstairs, or do you want us to do that here, or downstairs? Okay, so I'll mention this now, but I've got quite a few books from it. I'll be downstairs. Happy to sign the books if anyone's not got a copy. £10 in cash, or, because I know a lot of people don't have cash these days, can do a bank transfer or something if you're happy to do that.
Thanks very much. Give him a big round of applause. This man's going to be famous, so it's well worth getting a signed copy. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Greg, in here for Bob Gill's presentation.
Yeah, I know, yeah. To give you a very simple definition, truth is what people believe. And that is important because it's what they believe decides how they act. Yeah.
Will you take it now, please? It's one of the best meetings I've been to in a long time, I've got to say. The level of discussion. Oh, I'd love to. No, that would be great. My name is Paddy.
Give me that and I'll...
All right, okay, we got two there. Oh, no, we've got some in it. Oh. No, we've worked that out. We worked it out. So that's for 2 copies. Paddy, just best wishes. That would be grand. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I always carry one.
I just started writing Conway, so I'm going to look Conway Paddy. Is that
That's fine. That would do.
writing?
I'm going to be playing Bernard Shaw. I'm going to be playing Bernard Shaw on this stage tonight. So I'll be doing Comrades. Thank you very much indeed. That's great. Thank you. Splendid show. Great one.
I'm Barry, with a B. And a Y at the end. Right, thanks very much. I saw the big table display downstairs, but I didn't see that. If I had, I'd go on my part. But I've always been curious about Seamus Milne.